Oh. There's like a 10-second delay.
Oh my god. Oh my god.
Jeez. Jeez. Well, all right.
are sounding the alarm about hate here at home.
As the FBI has noted, we are seeing an increase in reported threats against faith communities, particularly Jewish, Muslim, and Arab communities and institutions.
A new report from the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security detailing that recent events have sharpened the focus of potential attacks on targeted individuals and institutions perceived as symbolic or tied to the conflict. Cities across the country now stepping up security efforts in the wake of these threats. California Governor Gavin Newsom authorizing $10 million in funding for increased police presence at places of worship, including synagogues and mosques. With daily demonstrations flooding the streets of New York, the NYPD deploying all officers in full uniform until further notice. Despite an increase in law enforcement, the fear of these threats becoming reality. In New York City, police releasing these photos of a man who they say punched a woman in the face at a subway station, allegedly telling her it was, quote, because she was Jewish. And in Cincinnati, the Jewish Community Relations Council says at least 10 anti-Semitic incidents were reported at schools in the city in just 1 week, including bullying of Jewish students and harassment.
Since the massacre of Israeli civilians and others on October 7th, we've seen a 51% increase in anti-Semitic incidents around the country in comparison to the same time frame the previous year. It just shows that what happens in the Middle East manifests itself here in the United States and frankly around the world.
Free Palestine!
Meanwhile, in Pennsylvania, a man has been arrested after police say he approached a group of pro-Palestinian demonstrators, yelled racial slurs, and pointed a gun at them. And in San Diego, police are investigating a possible hate crime at the Islamic Center after flyers and blue cloth were displayed near the mosque.
We as, Muslim Americans, we have the right, like every other people who belong to any faith congregation, we have the right to come and pray safely.
Anti-Semitic and anti-Muslim hate speech have also been on the rise online. According to the Global Project Against Hate and Extremism, the social media platform 4chan, an unregulated messaging forum often used by hate groups and white supremacists, saw a 479% increase in the use of explicit anti-Semitic and anti-Muslim slurs since the war began.
When you see spikes in violent, hateful rhetoric in any of the online platforms, but especially those fringe platforms that extremists often operate in, it's a huge red flag.
The rise in verbal and physical threats coming after a 6-year-old Palestinian American boy was stabbed to death in Illinois. Prosecutors say his landlord targeted him for being Muslim.
You want war? It's overseas. It's not our war. It's not the United States war. We're gathering here to say we need to save our kids. I'm not just saying about Palestinians. I'm saying about our kids.
A devastated community torn apart by another hate-fueled attack.
Stephen Romo joins us now from New York. Stephen, you mentioned in your report there this new report from the FBI. Does that report list any specific threats?
Yeah, Ellison, that's the thing about this report. It doesn't mention any specific plots or anything like that. The warnings are much more general because the climate is so heated and there are many potential targets that are seen as connected to the conflict, whether they actually are or not. Things like mosques and synagogues. Interestingly, the report says the biggest threats come from lone actors, the so-called lone wolves that we talk about, who may be inspired by this conflict. Ellison?
All right, Stephen Romo in New York, thank you. Staying at home, the conflict in the Middle East sparking fierce debates about free speech across university campuses. Students now facing personal and professional backlash as they pick their respective sides. NBC's Jake Ward reports from Berkeley, California.
Palestine will be free.
Opposing rallies at Columbia, a die-in at Harvard. The latest protests are part of a long tradition of free speech on campus. But some law students are now finding their words can affect their future. Law firm Winston & Straw announced they rescinded a job offer to a top NYU law student this month after blaming Israel for the violence on October 7th. And law firm Davis Polk pulled 3 more offered to Harvard students for signing a similar statement. Now, a tenured professor has written an op-ed for the Wall Street Journal entitled, "Do Not Hire My Anti-Semitic Students."
Free speech does not mean there's no consequences for free speech.
Stephen Solomon says he considers any justification of the Hamas attacks to be anti-Semitic hate speech.
This is a professional setting. These are people who are to be trained as lawyers. They should not be going out as lawyers if they're advocating the murder and justifying the murder of innocent people.
One Berkeley student group mentioned in the op-ed characterized the October 7th attacks as resistance to apartheid. In a statement to NBC News, the group calls the article a smear that wrongly conflates activism with anti-Semitism. Some students unaffiliated with the group say they are concerned about the op-ed's precedent.
And welcome back here to Live Now from Fox. You're taking a live picture right now. This is in Times Square, a massive pro-Israeli rally taking place there. And look at the signs. You can just see them with some of these images of some of these Israelis who've been missing for almost 2 weeks, taken hostage by Hamas there. So Times Square tonight filled with New Yorkers, most likely many of them who practice the Jewish faith, probably some who don't, coming out in solidarity to make their voices heard. And in just about a little over 20 minutes' time, we're going to hear from President Biden, not only about the Israel-Hamas war, but also about the war in Ukraine as well. Seated down there at the Oval Office, behind the Resolute desk. He's only given one other Oval Office address before. In his entire presidency, Live Now look outside of the White House there, illuminated in pink for Breast Cancer Awareness Month. In the meantime, we want to just kind of preview President Biden's remarks, what he could potentially say, what he's not going to say. Let's do that right now with our friend Politico's Daniel Littman. He joins us now. Daniel, good to see you. Thanks for being with us. I know you've been on TV today kind of previewing President Biden's speech. Have you gotten any insight about what the main message is going to be from some of your sources there at the White House? Is this going to be kind of what the United States' role and direction is going forward with relation to these conflicts?
I think he's going to be talking about how America has a role to play in the world, that we can't be the world policeman, but that we have to help our allies like Israel and Ukraine battle against either terrorists in Israel's case or Russia, a superpower that has enacted lots of evil bombing attacks on innocent Ukrainian civilians. He is going to call for Israel to probably make sure that humanitarian needs are taken into account. But I think it's going to be a pretty strongly pro-Israel message. But he's also going to be talking about the border security issues we have on the U.S.-Mexican border. There is going to be money for border security in that. And they're trying to do a big package on this to get the pro-Ukrainian allies in Congress, the pro-Israeli allies, people who care about border security, and almost make it almost like a Christmas tree to make it harder for people to vote against it.
Okay, so Daniel, what you're saying is this is going to be primarily a big ask of Congress for more funding for all of these priorities. Is that the main message of this speech, you think?
I think so. And he's going to be talking about the terrorism that he saw in Israel. It was only a 7-hour trip, but he met with Israeli Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu, other members of the Israeli Unity War Cabinet. He heard stories about what had happened on that Hamas attack. He's going to be, I wonder if he tells about the $100 million in aid that he's giving to the Palestinians, which has come under some criticism, and whether that can be guaranteed to not go to Hamas. And it'll be interesting to see whether he touches on the differences and similarities between the attack on Israel and also the 9/11 attack we had 22 years ago, and how we learned some lessons about how we responded, where a lot of Americans would not have wanted to stay in Afghanistan forever. And Israel has said that they don't want to occupy Gaza, but someone has to be the governing authority in that land.
So, Daniel, you know, that was, I thought, pretty striking, President Biden there in Israel just yesterday, kind of with a word of caution and restraint to the Israeli people about, you know, how rageful Americans were after 9/11. And he was saying there were mistakes made. You pointed that out, you know, in the 22 years since. So that was kind of a word of caution, because there's been some reporting out there to suggest that President Biden...
And reporters were filming her, trying to follow her every move. She wore a smile.
Of the second Intifada, when Israelis invaded.
He's lost multiple members of his family. He stopped working because he said there is
VIP room. She, as she entered the room, just looked at 2 or 3 different spots. Like this. She did not turn her head. She did not look excited. She looked as if she were in charge. And all this comes from training.
All of South Korea watched on as Kim Yo-jong and the North Korean delegation were warmly welcomed at the presidential palace.
김정은이 그 여동생 김여정을 서울에 보낸 것은 이제 김여정을 통해서 이제 한국의 모습을 있는 그대로 이제 파악하고 싶었기 때문이라고 봅니다. 북한의 간부들이 한국에 와서 그들이 보고 느끼는 것을 김정은에게 있는 그대로 보고를 하기는 어려울 겁니다. 만약 한국에 와서 좋은 것을 보고서 그것을 이제 김정은에게 그대로 얘기하면은 한국에 대해서 어떤 동경심이나 환상이 있는 것 아닌가라는 오해를 받을 수 있기 때문에 이제 북한의 일반 간부들은 이제 좋은 것을 보고도 이야기 못하고 부정적인 것만 김정은에게 이야기할 가능성이 높습니다. 그러나 이 김정은은 한국을 있는 그대로 보고 이해하고 싶었기 때문에 그에게 모든 걸 허심탄회하게 이야기할 수 있는 자신의 여동생 김여정을 그때 남한에 보냈다고 생각이 됩니다.
The South Korean media covered Kim Yo-jong's visit as if she was a rock star, scrutinizing her every move. Lee Chong-min is an expert on North Korea at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace in the United States.
The South Korean press at that time was extremely amazed at her level of aptitude, the way she talked with the president and other high-level officials, and there was this aura of this, wow, she's like the Madonna, of North Korea. I mean, Kim Yo-jong became a very important psychological icon of the North Korean regime.
Kim Yo-jong's return to Pyongyang was triumphant. Her charm campaign in the South cemented her place in North Korea's circle of power. Her success in calming relations between the normally hostile nations was seen just 2 months later when Kim Jong-un met South Korean President Moon Jae-in in the demilitarized zone dividing the 2 Koreas. Joining hands, the 2 Korean presidents crossed no man's land together.
طلبها من الكونغرس، ولكن الرئيس بايدن الليلة أيضا سوف يخاطب كونغرس منقسم على نفسه. لا يوجد حتى الآن رئيس لمجلس النواب، ومن دون وجود رئيس لمجلس النواب لن تكون هناك أموال تمويل إضافي لا لإسرائيل ولا لأوكرانيا، لأن أي من قرارات التمويل ينبغي أن تمر على مجلسي النواب والشيوخ وأن تتم الموافقة عليها من قبل المجلسين، ورئيس مجلس النواب هو الوحيد المنوط بتقديم أي قرار أو أي مشروع قرار في غرفة مجلس النواب. وبالتالي حقيقة الرئيس بايدن أيضا بحسب ما علمنا سوف يهيئ الشعب الأمريكي على ما يبدو وأنها حرب طويلة لإسرائيل في غزة. هذا يعني المزيد من
these major conflicts on the world stage.
reserve forces, and many young people above the age of 20 to 25 are actually called back into the
Israel, slaughtered our civilians, slaughtered men, women, and children, slaughtered babies, mutilated babies, one of which we just found this morning. A mother and her 5-year-old child. We found their burnt bodies in the attic of a house where they were hiding from terrorists who literally burnt them alive, burnt them until they died. This is the organization we're going to trust. So I really think that it's the world needs to view with a large degree of skepticism anything that they hear coming from Gaza, because most things that are coming from Gaza are coming from Hamas. And as we've shown, Hamas has no problem lying to the entire world.
There'll be those who will be watching and those who are skeptical of the Israel Defense Forces who may turn around and ask you, Major Doron, how do we believe the authenticity of the evidence put out by the IDF? Take the audio tape as an example. These could just be two people put up by the IDF having this conversation with each other, which the Israel Defense Forces later release. What do you have to say about the credibility of the evidence put out by the Israeli Defense Forces to back their claim?
I think the very basis of this conversation is really mistaken. To even begin to compare Israel, a Western democracy, a country that upholds the finest democratic and moral ideals, to Hamas, a radical terror organization similar to those you even have in your own country, and similar to ISIS, who chops apart people. I think any comparison between these two are wrong. In any case, if you look at what we released from the hospital, you don't need to take my word for it. Look at it yourself. It's not even our footage. It's Al Jazeera footage, meaning it's footage that came out from Al Jazeera that shows a rocket, a series of rockets fired by Palestinian Islamic Jihad.
About to see American weapons in the hands of Mexican cartels.
A gun pipeline to Mexico.
We are arming the cartels.
100%, no doubt about it. Happening right under our noses.
Who's doing something about this? Nobody.
A CBS Reports exclusive.
Most Americans have no idea that we are effectively arming the enemy next door.
This is the story the American people need to know.
Arming cartels. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Las Vegas Aces won their second straight WNBA championship Wednesday. Despite two starters out with injuries, Las Vegas defeated the New York Liberty in 4 games. The Aces are the league's first repeat champions in more than 20 years, and the third team to pull off that feat overall. A group of university students drove what they believe is the world's first solar-powered off-road car 620 miles through Morocco. The Stella Terra is a 2-seater equipped with rooftop solar panels and is road legal. It navigated deserts, riverbeds, and mountain trails. The car is meant to highlight the potential impact of deserts, riverbeds, and mountain trails. Stella Terra used 30% to highlight the expected impact of deserts, riverbeds, and mountain trails. Stella Terra used 30% to highlight the expected impact of deserts, riverbeds, and mountain trails. Stella Terra used 30% to highlight the expected impact of deserts, riverbeds, and mountain trails. Stella Terra used 30% to highlight the expected impact of deserts, riverbeds, and
American democracy.
The most important stories on a day-to-day, hour-to-hour basis.
You're going to hear a lot of reporting.
It is clearly a pivotal moment.
Gun control, the economy, education. Both sides of the political aisle fight it out for power.
Bringing you the analysis that you need.
Thoughtfully, with context.
Be part of the conversation.
On CBS News streaming.
Welcome to America Decides, Monday through Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern.
This is CBS.
Goals reached, wealth attained, moments of a job well done. Whether it is for today or building for the future, striving for more matters. Plant Moran Wealth Management provides individualized attention, an independent holistic approach to growing, protecting, and sharing wealth. For those who earn for more, there is Plant Moran Wealth Management.
Denver Film Festival returns. Filmmakers in person. Red carpet premieres.
On Masterpiece Mystery.
DC Harper Western, Edinburgh Police. I'm sorry I couldn't get you a space in our station.
Victim is an ex-prisoner.
She was in a cage for 5 years. What monster puts her in another one?
Family tension, split loyalties.
And nearly £20,000 in cash.
Let's see her collect this money. So brave. I haven't told him yet.
To the nation. Good night.
When it matters most, America turns to
Successful alpine skier, male or female ever, and a worldwide inspiration.
We need a lot of women doing sports really, really well.
The story of Michaela Schifrin's game-changing reign at the top of the slopes when we go person to person.
You can't get answers in a tweet on Face the Nation. We try to separate the noise from the news. You need to be able to have an actual conversation.
I'm a very curious person. I wake up every morning asking what's happening in the world, why is this happening, and how do we answer that question?
7 deaths has been associated with the presence of cyanide in 2 containers of extra-strength Tylenol.
It caused a national panic.
Not take Tylenol until further notice.
Well, how could all these different people been poisoned by the same person at the same time?
One day, everything fall apart.
As soon as one lead reaches a dead end, there is another tip to track.
We are going to be able to identify what happened.
This is a CBS News special report. I'm Nora O'Donnell in Washington. In just moments, President Biden will deliver an Oval Office address to the nation, only the second of his presidency after traveling to Israel just yesterday. With tensions rising around the globe, the president will make a direct plea to the American people, saying there's an urgent need to keep money flowing to Israel and Ukraine. The president says it's a perilous moment for global democracy. CBS News has learned the president will ask Congress for roughly $100 billion over the next year, including $10 billion toward Israeli defense and $60 billion for Ukraine and its war against Russia. The package also includes money for Taiwan and U.S. border security. The Biden administration plans to give $100 million in humanitarian aid to the Palestinians, provided from already existing funds. Now, Gaza remains blocked off, its people unable to leave. Agreements have been made to get aid in, but the situation at this hour remains fluid. And also this new tonight, news of a U.S. Navy destroyer firing the first American shots of this conflict, taking down drones and missiles coming from Yemen, potentially heading towards Israel. Now, this Oval Office address will give the president a chance to explain to the people what the impact is to us here at home and around the world. Here now, the president.
Good evening, my fellow Americans. We're facing an inflection point in history.
One of those moments where the decisions we make today are going to determine the future for decades to come. That's what I'd like to talk with you about tonight. You know, earlier this morning I returned from Israel. They tell me I'm the first American president to travel there during the war. I met with the Prime Minister and members of his cabinet. And most movingly, I met with Israelis who had personally lived through horrific horror of the attack by Hamas on the 7th of October. More than 1,300 people slaughtered in Israel, including at least 32 American citizens. Scores of innocents, from infants to the elderly grandparents. Israelis, Americans taken hostage. As I told the families of Americans being held captive by Hamas, we're pursuing every avenue to bring their loved ones home. As president, there is no higher priority for me than the safety of Americans held hostage. The terrorist group Hamas unleashed pure, unadulterated evil in the world. But sadly, the Jewish people know perhaps better than anyone that there is no limit to the depravity of people when they want to inflict pain on others. In Israel, I saw people who are strong, determined, resilient, and also angry, in shock and in deep, deep pain. I also spoke with President Abbas, the Palestinian Authority, and reiterated that the United States remains committed to the Palestinian people's right to dignity and to self-determination. The actions of Hamas terrorists don't take that right away. Like so many other, I'm heartbroken by the tragic loss of Palestinian life, including the explosion at the hospital in Gaza, which was not done by the Israelis. We mourn every innocent life lost. We can't ignore the humanity of innocent Palestinians who only want to live in peace and have an opportunity. You know, the assault on Israel echoes nearly 20 months of war, tragedy, and brutality inflicted on the people of Ukraine, people that were very badly hurt since Putin launched his all-out invasion. We've not forgotten the mass graves, the bodies found bearing signs of torture, rape used as a weapon by the Russians, and thousands of Ukrainian children forcibly taken into Russia, stolen from their parents. It's sick. Hamas and Putin represent different threats, but they share this in common. They both want to completely annihilate a neighboring democracy, completely annihilate it. Hamas' stated purpose for existing is the destruction of the state of Israel and the murder of Jewish people. Hamas does not represent the Palestinian people. Hamas uses Palestinian civilians as human shields, and innocent Palestinian families are suffering greatly because of them. Meanwhile, Putin denies Ukraine has or ever had real statehood. He claims the Soviet Union created Ukraine. And just 2 weeks ago, he told the world that if the United States and our allies withdraw, and if the United States withdraw, our allies will as well, military support for Ukraine would have, quote, a week left to live, but we're not withdrawing. I know these conflicts can seem far away, and it's natural to ask, why does this matter to America? So let me share with you why making sure Israel and Ukraine succeed is vital for America's national security. You know, history has taught us that when terrorists don't pay a price for their terror, when dictators don't pay a price for their aggression, they cause more chaos and death and more destruction. They keep going, and the cost and the threats to America and the world keep rising. So if we don't stop Putin's appetite for power and control in Ukraine, he won't limit himself just to Ukraine. Putin's already threatened to remind, quote, remind Poland that their western land was a gift from Russia. One of his top advisors, a former president of Russia, has called Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania Russia's Baltic provinces. These are all NATO allies. For 75 years, NATO has kept peace in Europe and has been the cornerstone of American security. And if Putin attacks a NATO ally, we will defend every inch of NATO which the treaty requires and calls for. We'll have something that we do not seek. Make it clear, we do not seek. We do not seek to have American troops fighting in Russia or fighting against Russia. Beyond Europe, we know that our allies, and maybe most importantly our adversaries and competitors, are watching. They're watching our response in Ukraine as well. And if we walk away and let Putin erase Ukraine's independence, would-be aggressors around the world would be emboldened to try the same. The risk of conflict and chaos could spread in other parts of the world, in the Indo-Pacific, in the Middle East, especially in the Middle East. Iran is supporting Russia in Ukraine, and is supporting Hamas and other terrorist groups in the region, and will continue to hold them accountable, I might add. The United States and our partners across the region are working to build a better future for the Middle East. One where the Middle East is more stable, better connected to its neighbors, and through innovative projects like the India-Middle East-Europe Rail Corridor that I announced this year at the summit of the world's biggest economies. More predictable markets, more employment, less raids, less grievances, less war when connected. It benefits the people who would benefit the people of the Middle East and will benefit us. American leadership is what holds the world together. American alliances are what keep us, America, safe. American values are what make us a partner that other nations want to work with. To put all that at risk, if we walk away from Ukraine, if we turn our backs on Israel, it's just not worth it. That's why tomorrow I'm going to send to Congress an urgent budget request to fund America's national security needs, to support our critical partners, including Israel and Ukraine. It's a smart investment that's going to pay dividends for American security for generations. Help us keep American troops out of harm's way. Help us build a world that is safer, more peaceful, and more prosperous for our children and grandchildren. In Israel, we must make sure that they have what they need to protect their people today and always. The security package I'm sending to Congress and asking Congress to do is an unprecedented commitment to Israel's security that will sharpen Israel's qualitative military edge, which we've committed to, the qualitative military edge. We're going to make sure Iron Dome continues to guard the skies over Israel. We're going to make sure other hostile actors in the region know that Israel is stronger than ever and prevent this conflict from spreading. Look, at the same time, President Netanyahu and I discussed again yesterday the critical need for Israel to operate by the laws of war. That means protecting civilians in combat as best as they can. The people of Gaza urgently need food, water, and medicine. Yesterday, in discussions with the leaders of Israel and Egypt, I secured an agreement for the first shipment of humanitarian assistance from the United Nations to Palestinian civilians in Gaza. If Hamas does not divert or steal these shipments, we're going to provide an opening for sustained delivery of life-saving humanitarian assistance for the Palestinians. As I said in Israel, as hard as it is, we cannot give up on peace. We cannot give up on a two-state solution. Israel and Palestinians equally deserve to live in safety, dignity, and peace. You know, and here at home, we have to be honest with ourselves. In recent years, too much hate has given too much oxygen, fueling racism, the rise of anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, right here in America. It's also intensified in the wake of recent events that led to the horrific threats and attacks that both shock us and break our hearts. On October 7th, terror attacks have triggered deep scars and terrible memories in the Jewish community. Today, Jewish families worried about being targeted in school, wearing symbols of their faith, walking down the street, or going out about their daily lives. And I know many of you in the Muslim American community, the Arab American community, the Palestinian American community, and so many others are outraged and hurting, saying to yourselves, here we go again with Islamophobia and distrust we saw after 9/11. Just last week, a mother was brutally stabbed. A little boy, here in the United States, a little boy who just turned 6 years old was murdered in their home outside of Chicago. His name was Wadiha, a proud American, a proud Palestinian American family. We can't stand by and stand silent when this happens. We must, without equivocation, denounce anti-Semitism. We must also, without equivocation, denounce Islamophobia. And to all you hurting, those of you hurting, I want you to know I see you. You belong. And I want to say this to you. You're all America. You're all America. This is in a moment where, you know, in moments like these, when fear and suspicion, anger and rage run hard, that we have to work harder than ever to hold on to the values that make us who we are. We're a nation of religious freedom, freedom of expression. We all have a right to debate and disagree without fear of being targeted in schools or workplaces or in our communities. We must renounce violence and vitriol. See each other not as enemies, but as fellow Americans. When I was in Israel yesterday, I said that when America experienced the hell of 9/11, we felt enraged as well. While we sought and got justice, we made mistakes. So I cautioned the government of Israel not to be blinded by rage. And here in America, let us not forget who we are. We reject all forms of hate, whether against Muslims, Jews, or anyone. That's what great nations do, and we are a great nation. On Ukraine, I'm asking Congress to make sure we can continue to send Ukraine the weapons they need to defend themselves and their country without interruption, so Ukraine can stop Putin's brutality in Ukraine. They are succeeding. When Putin invaded Ukraine, he thought he would take Kyiv and all of Ukraine in a matter of days. Well, over a year later, Putin has failed, and he continues to fail. Kyiv still stands because of the bravery of the Ukrainian people. We will prevail. Ukraine has regained more than 50% of the territory Russian troops once occupied, backed by U.S.-led coalition of more than 50 countries around the world, all doing its part to support Kyiv. What would happen if we walked away? We are the essential nation. Meanwhile, Putin has turned to Iran and North Korea to buy attack drones and ammunition to terrorize Ukrainian cities and people. From the outset, I've said, I will not send American troops to fight Ukraine. All Ukraine is asking for is help, for the weapons, munitions, the capacity, the capability to push invading Russian forces off their land, and the air defense systems to shoot down Russian missiles before they destroy Ukrainian cities. Let me be clear about something. We send Ukrainian equipment sitting in our stockpiles. And when we use the money allocated by Congress, we use it to replenish our own stores, our own stockpiles, with new equipment. Equipment that defends America and is made in America. Patriot missiles for air defense batteries, made in Arizona. Artillery shells manufactured in 12 states across the country, in Pennsylvania, Ohio, Texas, and so much more. You know, just as in World War II, today patriotic American workers are building the arsenal of democracy and serving the cause of freedom. Let me close with this. Earlier this year, I boarded Air Force One for a secret flight to Poland. There I boarded a train with blacked out windows for a 10-hour ride each way to Kyiv, to stand with the people of Ukraine ahead of the one-year anniversary of their brave fight against Putin. I'm told I was the first American to enter a war zone not controlled by the United States military since President Lincoln. With me was just a small group of security personnel and a few advisors. But when I exited that train and met Zelensky, President Zelensky, I didn't feel alone. I was bringing with me the idea of America, the promise of America, to the people who are today fighting for the same things we fought for 250 years ago: freedom, independence, self-determination. And as I walked through Kyiv with President Zelensky, with air raid sirens sounding in the distance, I felt something I've always believed, more strongly than ever before. America is a beacon to the world. Still. Whereas my friend Madeleine Albright said, the indispensable nation. Tonight, there are innocent people all over the world who hope because of us, who believe in a better life because of us, who are desperate not to be forgotten by us, and are waiting for us. But time is of the essence. I know we have our divisions at home. We have to get past them. We can't let petty, partisan, angry politics get in the way of our responsibilities as a great nation. We cannot and will not let terrorists like Hamas and tyrants like Putin win. I refuse to let that happen. In moments like these, we have to remember who we are. We are the United States of America. The United States of America. And there is nothing beyond our capacity if we do it together. My fellow Americans, thank you for your time. May God bless you all, and may God protect our troops.
The President of the United States making the case that this is a perilous moment for democracy around the globe and invoking America's ideals of freedom and noting that we must come to many of these countries' defense, particularly noting the people here in America are building the arsenal of democracy, some of these weapons, just as the President is asking Congress for $100 billion in new aid. Let's bring in Face the Nation moderator and chief foreign affairs correspondent Margaret Brennan. And Margaret, much of the nation has been focused on what happened in Israel for the past 2 weeks, but the president also making the case for Ukraine tonight.
That's right, Nora. And this was something where he linked the two, saying
he mourns every Israeli life lost. He said he's not forgotten the war in Ukraine and the abuses committed by Russia. He said the US and its allies will not withdraw from Ukraine and they will remain steadfast there. He said tomorrow he will send an urgent budget request to Congress to secure more military aid for Israel and Ukraine. He didn't specify exactly how much, but we understand it's somewhere in the region of about $100 billion. He said he can't give up on peace in the Middle East and the possibility of a two-state solution. Let's bring in our White House correspondent, Kimberly Halkett. She joins us again. Kimberly, so President Biden there clearly laying out the stakes for the US as he seeks more aid from Congress for Israel and Ukraine. What did you make of the speech, and why did Biden feel the need to address the country now?
Well, the U.S. president needs to address the country because I don't know if my microphone is picking it up, but there's a small but loud protest going on just adjacent to where I'm standing. And it really signifies that Americans are tired of paying for foreign wars. And so they're protesting. We've had protests ever since October 7th. And so there's waning support for the United States paying for foreign conflicts. A lot of Americans feel that the priorities now are domestic of sorts. So this is the problem for the U.S. president, is he has to make the case to the American public, and that's what we heard him doing. He made the case that American leadership and the alliances that the United States has keep Americans safe back here in the United States, and that the risks, as you heard him saying there just a few moments ago when he says we can't let, and I'm quoting here, terrorists like Hamas or tyrants like Putin win. He's basically hanging out there that there are risks if these groups are not contained, and basically saying that this could be something that could spread like a contagion, eventually coming back here to the United States. So the bottom line is he's making that argument. Whether or not the American people will buy that argument, though, as you can hear, there are some very loud protesters just outside the White House gates here, is certainly a challenge.
And Kimberly, I didn't hear exactly from Joe Biden how much money he was going to ask for Congress, but in the media there's this figure circulating of something like $100 billion to arm Israel and Ukraine. But of course, as you and I have been talking earlier, Congress is in legislative limbo with Republicans just unable to elect a new speaker. How is he going to get his money?
And the bottom line, Darren, it doesn't really matter how much the president asks for, because Congress will ultimately decide on the final number. So yes, the president is asking for roughly about $100 all told for a number of different security requests, including Israel and Ukraine. But Congress will ultimately decide how that money is spent. But it can't decide right now because it doesn't have a speaker. And it hasn't had one for 2 weeks since Kevin McCarthy in the House of Representatives was ousted. And so that means that any sort of government business is paralyzed, and it will remain that way. So any request for Ukraine, Israel, border security, it is all stalled until the House of Representatives is able to do its business. And we should point out that it's not just this foreign policy concern, it's also facing another deadline, and that is a potential government shutdown, the government funding deadline in mid-November.
All right, Kimberly Halkett, live for us there outside the White House. Kimberly, thank you. All right, let's bring in Marwan Bishara. He's Al Jazeera's senior political analyst. He joins us live from London. Marwan, so President Biden there talking about going cap in hand to Congress, asking for billions of dollars to help fund the wars in Gaza and Ukraine. What did you make of the speech, Marwan, and who is it likely to resonate with domestically and internationally?
Well, clearly there are two sub-headlines in the speech, right? So they are so clear: Israel and Ukraine. What's in common between them? Well, both are American allies, very strong American allies. But there is a major discrepancy, and that is Israel is an occupying power, while Ukraine is an occupied country. So equating between the two poses a major problem for the American president's argument. So while he talks about Russian brutality in Ukraine and condemns it, he ignores Israel's brutality in Gaza. And on our screen, as I'm watching the president, I can see there's a split screen. As he talks, we can see the images of the people in Gaza suffering. And that discrepancy, in fact, is crippling his foreign policy, notably in the Middle East, because just quickly,
I couldn't help but note many times he referred to the idea of building a better Middle East. Many times he referred to the idea of building a better Middle East and the infrastructure projects that he and the United States are involved in. All of that, of course, may fall on Israeli ears one way, but I would imagine might fall on the ears of Arab leaders in a very different way.
Yeah, of course. And I think how you build a better Middle East is the problem. The idea, the aspiration is easy, and that's where we are right now. We're really, in many ways, at a nadir in the Middle East in terms of trying to build a better Middle East. The idea, for example, the US has been committed to for a long time, the two-state solution, where you have Jews and Palestinians living side by side in the Middle East, in Israel. Well, that is an aspiration really now, isn't it? More than something that seems